What's up, world history kids? It's April 30th. We're almost in May. Can you believe it? It's been definitely a couple weeks since we've seen each other, but we're out here and getting close to finishing this unit. Okay, it's coming at you with another video today. Friendly reminder, make sure you get into me so I hear from you. Get your work into me tomorrow by 3:30. All right, so make sure you're doing that. If you have questions, of course, come talk to me. Today I'm going to go ahead. We're going to go from slides 54 to 59 today. We probably only got about two more. I don't know, maybe just one more video, maybe two more videos left in this unit before we start kind of reviewing. That'll be more next week though, all right? So just be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Boom. Okay. Let's go ahead and let's get through this. We're going to talk about space race, and we're going to talk about kind of how the Cold War plays out in other ways beyond just kind of war. There will be like one specific like war we talk about today, but we're also going to talk about how like the Cold War played out in other indirect ways besides fighting. So the first big one is the space race. What I want you to do is go ahead, watch this video. It's a History Channel video that talks about the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. As we developed more and more technology and science, there was a big push back in the 50s and in the 60s to learn about space. It was like the final frontier, as it was kind of referred to back then. We had conquered and settled and we understood everything about the earth, but we only had very limited knowledge about space, kind of just basic stuff. And so, being the two superpowers at the time, the United States and the Soviet Union, the goal was who could do the most in space. And the ultimate goal, which was realistic, based off the resources and the amount of time it takes and the money to do it, was to get to the moon. That was commonly seen as the ultimate peak for space travel during this time period. Now we're talking about going to Mars. We've come a long way. But the moon is relatively close. It's only like a couple thousand miles away from the Earth. And I know it sounds like a lot, but it's actually really not that far. So the goal was who can get kind of the moon first. And obviously, it first had to start by, well, who can put a satellite in space? And then who could put a living organism in a satellite? And then how far could that satellite go? And then so on and so forth. Who could land something on the moon? For a long time, the Soviet Union was constantly kind of one step ahead of us. But President John F. Kennedy was very instrumental in being, look, we want to get to the moon. We want to be the ones to do it. We want to go and get there. And so with the support from the federal government and kind of with the Cold War in terms of the competition, we created NASA, right? And so today we think of NASA as like spaceships and all that stuff. Well, this is when NASA really got all their funding and were able to really kind of, get going on a big scale. And so ultimately, we finally put a man on the moon. We were the first to do it in 1969. It came at great cost. There were missions that failed, people who died, billions and billions and billions of dollars spent just so we could plant our little flag on the moon and Neil Armstrong could say, this is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It talks about everything about that in the video. But the point of the space race is to demonstrate that the United States and the Soviet Union not only fought puppet wars and tried to fight for control of different countries to influence them on being capitalists or communists so they could have more power, they also want to be braggadocious, puff their chest up, have the biggest chain, you know, have the new Jordans, the new Supreme t-shirt. They wanted to have the best of the best stuff. And it was this constant one-upmanship between the United States and Soviet Union that occurred. And they had the ability to do so because these were the only two superpowers that had the money, the resources to do so. So watch that video about the space race. Gives you a perspective on like the competition to get to the moon. But of course, USA, shout out my boomer memes, dab. So yeah, okay. We're gonna talk about a couple other pop culture things and things that were going on. We're kind of now into like the 70s, okay? So we put a man on the moon in 69, Vietnam War ends in about 72. So now we're kind of going through the 70s now, 70s into the 80s, okay? Slide 55. This is important because history, once again, repeats itself and it rears its head in the 21st century. So, in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded neighboring Afghanistan. There was a movement at the time in Afghanistan for communists to take over. Obviously, the Soviet Union, like, oh, this sounds good. So they invaded to help out with that transition to a communist government. But there were a lot of people in Afghanistan that did not want communism. So the United States, being anti-communist, decided, hey, look, you know what? Let's help the people fighting against the Soviet Union and the communists. Let's arm them and train them to help fight and deliver and win their country. Well, here's the kind of dark and ironic twist about that. We sent in CIA operatives, a lot of weapons. They got elite training to these groups of individuals who were anti-communist in Afghanistan. And there were a variety of groups. One of those groups, you know, and one of the people who were taught was actually Osama bin Laden. Many years later, in 2001, Osama bin Laden built up enough support to create his terrorist organization known as Al-Qaeda. And he would later attack the United States on 9/11, even though the United States helped him recover and defend Afghanistan from like a neighboring invading country. So it's kind of ironic. It's kind of like, you know, beyond the fact that 9/11 is one of the, and we're going to talk about this in our final unit. Besides the fact that 9/11 is the worst attack really in American soil and history, and it's changed the world, as we'll talk about. If that wasn't bad enough, it's the fact that we were able to train someone for like Osama bin Laden and help those people protect their own country, and they stabbed us in the back. So talk about the ultimate slap in the face, like being fake as you know what. Just thought I'd maybe drop that little nugget on you. I don't know how many of you knew this, but that's a true story. So who knows if maybe we had just let the Soviet Union take over Afghanistan, if we weren't as afraid of communism as we were back then, would there have been a 9/11? Perhaps. Who knows? That's the great what if, another great what if in history. Let's go to slide 56. So now we're into the peak of the Cold War. This is kind of when the Soviet Union and the United States have really separated themselves from the rest of the world in terms of their overall wealth of power. It was really tense, the relationship. Both countries spent significant amounts of money on their military to prove who was better, as I'm going to show you in a second. Also, they looked for superiority in other in avenues as well. Oftentimes, athletics was actually this theater where like competition took place. So the Summer Olympic Games were supposed to take place in Moscow in 1980. The United States decided to boycott. And then, as 4 years later, kind of ironically, the Olympics was going to be in LA. The Soviet Union, being upset that we boycotted their games, they boycotted our games, and they told their like friends, you know, the people, their friends, the people who they controlled, the East Germans, the Polish, etc. They boycotted as well when the Olympics 4 years later were in LA. Let's go to the next slide. if you look at movies too in the 70s and 80s, you often see that in a lot of American action movies or sometimes like other drama, sports, thriller movies, um, a lot of times the Russians were the bad people. So this probably played out most infamously in Rocky Four. That's Ivan Drago, the guy who says, "If he dies, he dies. I must break you." Because there's like a million Rocky movies. If you've seen the most recent Creed movies, like the second Creed movie is kind of like a sequel in a way to like Rocky Four. Rocky Four is a good movie, but it's pretty much the whole movie plays on the public at the time, the American public, the big bad Russian, and like the red, white, and blue American. If you look at the boxing trunks, you even see Rocky's got the red, white, and blue, and Ivan Drago has like the communist flag. So it's not just a boxing match, but it's also like a fight between America and the Soviet Union, right? So there's this natural rivalry. And we see this in films oftentimes if you look at history. Whoever America is at odds with, we often villainize those people. In World War II, a lot of films were in that time period were made against like Italians, Germans, Japanese. Following that, when you had the Korean and Vietnam War, you saw like more of the Asian kind of villains, right? Villains who were of Asian descent. As we transition to the like 21st century after 9/11, all of a sudden like the radical Islamic terrorist kind of like character was the main villain. So if you kind of look at villains throughout history, you'll notice a trend that depending on who we are against as a country at that time, we often villainize those people in films. It's kind of an interesting little thing that maybe you didn't notice before. So just maybe keep an eye on that. In the coming years of who knows who the next villains might be in our film. Okay, let's talk specifically about sports now on slide 58. Probably the most infamous sporting event that really demonstrated the rivalry between the United States and Soviet Union is known as the Miracle on Ice. It's probably one of the greatest sporting events in history when you look at it in a grand scale picture. The Olympics, the Winter Olympics were in 1980, and they were in New York. They were in Lake Placid. Back then, the Olympics, the Winter and the Summer Olympics were in the same year. Soon after this, they started splitting them up to kind of just have a little more break and spread out the Olympics. So then the Winter Olympics and Summer Olympics are like every 2 years. There's always like 2-year difference. And so with the Winter Olympics being in the United States, there was a lot of excitement because the biggest probably event out of Winter Olympics is the hockey events. And back in these days, professionals did not compete in the Olympics. Today, like for basketball, for example, LeBron, Steph, they go out and do their thing in the Olympics, right? We have professional athletes that go to the Olympics. But back before really the 90s, it was pretty much all amateurs, mostly college kids who didn't have a job and probably were just college athletes on a scholarship. Those were the people we were sending to the Olympics. That's how it was in the United States. The Soviet Union, though, they had already moved to the professional model. They were paying the best hockey players in their country to be on their national team. That's how it worked back then. So for a long time, the Soviet Union won gold medal after gold medal after gold medal after world championship and so on and so forth in the hockey events because they were the only country that employed professional players. This Soviet Union team in like a warm-up match beat the NHL All-Star team by like 7-8 goals, which is a lot in hockey. And so it was kind of seen that going into this Olympics, Soviet Union was just going to crush everyone, including the United States, on their home ice. It was going to be a big embarrassment for the U.S. But somehow, some way, a group of these college amateurs defeated this professional Soviet Union team who had won the previous 4 Olympic gold medals. It's like 16 years of dominance at the highest level of your sport. It's kind of crazy. It's like the Warriors winning 16 championships in a row or something like that. And it's often referred to as the miracle on ice because and this is where I would show you the clip, and you can look this up on YouTube. Um, this announcer, Bob Costas, he makes as the clock is winding down, it's like 3 seconds left too. And he's like, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. That's his famous call. It's probably one of the most famous sports broadcasting calls in history. The United States wins and they get to go. This was just the semifinal, and then they win the next round. They win the gold medal. And it's a big move because this is the same time the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And so, there's just a lot of like things going on outside of this hockey game. It really helped bring like this American patriotism at a high. It was like, yeah, we did it. We beat the dirty communists. So it's just another example of how, it wasn't just fighting military. We had competition in other ways. And then the last slide we're going to end on today. This goes to show you the number of nuclear warheads on slide 59 that the United States and the Soviet Union had. And if you notice, the x-axis, shout out your math teacher, I'm supporting them. Shout out Boris or Finlinson or Juan or I don't know who else, Alvarez maybe, I don't know who else you might have. Bishop maybe. The x-axis is years. The y-axis is the number of warheads, nuclear warheads, like missiles, like bombs, think of that, in the tens of thousands. And if you notice, kind of in the bottom left-hand corner where the graph begins, before 1950, we don't really have that, neither us or the Soviet Union really have nuclear warheads. But then all of a sudden in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, there's a dramatic escalation. At one point, the Soviet Union has over 40,000 nuclear weapons. And so you're probably thinking, well, why do they need that many? Well, here's the thing. If you know your enemy, let's say the United States is your enemy, they're building their nuclear arsenal of 30,000 nuclear weapons. Well, then you need to have that many too. You don't want to be outgunned. It's a competition. You got to understand these nuclear weapons cost, millions, tens of millions of dollars to develop. If you add it all up, the cost of all these things, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. But here's the silly thing. You don't need 40,000 nuclear missiles. You really don't. Because you launch about 10 to 15, the world's going to end. That's it. We're going to go to a nuclear fallout and we're going to die. It's going to be like, what's that movie? It's called, or the video game, it's called Fallout, right? Isn't like Fallout Vegas and stuff like that? Video game people, help me out. But yeah, it's going to be like that. You don't need 40,000, right? Trust me, you drop enough nuclear weapons at one time, especially the ones we've developed during this period that are bigger than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, way bigger. That was like baby bombs compared to what we have now. It's not going to take many to destroy the world. So if you notice, it kind of really reached its peak in about 1980. And then finally after that, and you're going to find out why more so in the next video, stay tuned, nuclear production goes down to kind of where we're at now, where we have had to really work out agreements slowly with the Soviet Union, who now we would call Russia, about slowly de-arming our nuclear weapons. The problem with getting rid of nuclear weapons, it's not that easy. It's not like taking apart a gun. It's not like blowing something up. Nuclear weapons have nuclear waste, and nuclear waste takes tens of thousands of years to go away. So we don't really have a good solution. Right now, the best solution we have is we have a kind of cave like in like Nevada where we put in where no one lives. And we just have put all our stuff there really deep underground. That's our solution. Until we figure out how to get rid of nuclear waste, this is a problem that, because of what happened in the 60s and 70s, we're going to have to deal with for thousands of generations. That's why we're really worried about like if North Korea develops nuclear weapons, because as a world, we've kind of come to our senses and realized we don't really need more nuclear weapons. We have enough to end the world. So we're slowly de-arming, denuclearizing ourselves as we speak. Although I don't know how well Trump is doing that, but Obama did a really good job of that. But with that being said, I'm going to end this share. Stop share. this is our last video for the week. Make sure you watch it. Make sure to watch that space race thing too. Besides that, sounds like we're getting better news. This has been a really good week of news for the coronavirus. We're heading towards the right direction. It sounds like we just got to kind of have to stay put for a few more weeks. And then it sounds like by June, things are going to be kind of open again, at least at a very basic level. So just keep hanging tough. We're going to make it. I'm hopeful that I will get to see you all back in August. And I'm crossing my fingers for that. Okay, so keep doing what you got to do. And I will talk to you guys later. Tell me how.